So welcome to the second half of our evening. In these second halves, we quite briefly look at the central Buddhist teachings. And welcome as well if you are watching this on YouTube. So in the last 4 weeks, we have explored Buddhist ethics in terms of ethical actions and ethical speech. So tonight, we'll be looking at the ethics of mind. So each week, you've heard me remind us of the general principles of Buddhist ethics. And I'll do that again this evening, but very briefly this time. So Buddhist ethics manifest in skillful behaviors motivated by positive intentions. And our behaviors are skillful or unskillful in Buddhist terminology, suggesting that ethics are a training. So we are learning to become more ethical, more skilled in ethics. And we improve that skill by carefully examining our motivation and also the potential consequences of our actions. And we particularly do our best to avoid actions or speech that harm others. So the ethical guidelines then are set out as 5 trainings, the so-called 5 precepts, of which we have covered 4 so far. So we've looked at harmlessness, at generosity, at contentment, and at truthfulness. And these guidelines are just that. They're guidelines. So following them requires us to reflect on the particular situation we find ourselves in very carefully. So for example, going back to last week's material on truthfulness, if you want to tell a truth to someone, it's really important that we will ask ourselves some questions before we tell that truth. For example, is it helpful for the person to hear this? Is it a good time to be telling this truth? Whose truth is it anyway? And are they able to hear what we have to say? So now we turn our attention to what goes on in the mind. After all, everything begins in the mind. So let's see tonight's ethical guideline, the 5th precept, which is worded as I undertake to abstain from taking intoxicants in its negative form, i.e. The behavior that we move away from, and then in its positive form, the behavior we move towards. With mindfulness clear and radiant, I purify my mind. So let's start with these intoxicants. What are they? So in the early Buddhist texts, intoxicants were mainly strong drink. And then the later tradition added the intoxications of youth, beauty, wealth, and power. And I think we could add to the intoxication of power status or intellect, or in fact, any talent or ability that we have. And these qualities, although good in themselves, they are all things that potentially can make us lose our head. So having those qualities, those talents, doesn't easily lead to modesty, to humility, to lessening of conceit. And these qualities, modesty, humility, and less conceit are really helpful qualities for us on our spiritual journey. So this state of intoxication, however it's been caused, is then contrasted with the clear and radiant mindfulness as our goal. And the problem of being intoxicated is that we lose our ethical sensitivity in the heady excitement, say, of power, or in the loss of inhibitions caused by drinking or taking drugs. So the mindfulness we cultivate in meditation and then take out to the rest of our life has three particular aspects. They are, in Pali, Sati, Sampajanya, and Appamada. Now, I've given them in Pali because the English translations don't actually help us to make them any clearer. So the cultivation of the aspect of mindfulness that I have called Sati, it helps us to stay present in our experience. It helps us to, in some ways, it helps our wandering mind not to wander quite so much. Yeah. And it helps us to observe our sensations, our emotions, our thoughts without identifying with them overly. So training in the aspect of Sampajanya then helps us to remember our purpose. It enhances our cognitive ability, including learning new things. And then finally, Appamada develops our ethical sensitivity, and with that, our empathy and our compassion. And I don't know how long you have been meditating, but perhaps even after a few sessions of the mindfulness or breathing, you may have noticed some general effects of mindfulness. So as I say, even if you're practicing for a relatively short time, you may notice that you are less anxious, less stressed, less fearful. You have more mental clarity, perhaps. You sleep better, and generally your physical balance is better. By engaging in training ourselves in mindfulness, we can leave behind our unhelpful habits and dependencies on such things as food or drink, or addictions to various entertainments in the form of online activity, games, shopping, box sets, social media, and so on. And this restless mind, always looking for something to attach to, is a habit that we have cultivated over time, perhaps over a long time. But the good news is that we can unlearn that habitual addicted functioning of the mind through training in mindfulness. Our teacher Sangharakshita taught the 4 levels of mindfulness as a progressive practice to become more mindful. So on the first level, we become aware of our surroundings, our environment and the things in it. On the second level, the practice is awareness of ourself, so our body, our emotions, and our thoughts. The third level is awareness of others. So other people, other beings that we come into contact with. And then finally, there is awareness of reality. Now, this is, of course, very difficult for us ordinary deluded beings. But we can take up a contemplation of reality by engaging in particular practices. And one of those practices is called recollecting the Buddha, the Buddha-anusati. It was a practice that we did on our festival day on Sunday. So this is really all that I'm going to say tonight. So if you are watching us on YouTube, we'll say goodbye at this point.